Hi, and welcome to the Andre The Beast Show. Today, we're going to address a topic that individuals have fought for quite some time, and that's the right to vote. This is a very important topic to me because it gives me as an individual the right and the ability to hope that my voice is heard and that the leaders that I acknowledge will carry that forward. I wrote something and figured that the way I'm going to open this show up is to read what I wrote. And it's not just my viewpoint, but viewpoints from individuals that I've talked to. This is the first time in the U.S., or should I say it's the first time that the U.S. has been put on display with so much negativity surrounding it. A country that has gone from international power, respect, and admiration, and often looked at like, wow, is now being seen as chaotic, unstable, and more importantly, confused. The split between the parties has weakened the stature of the U.S. to outsiders, foreign and abroad. While we look into and see these parties as splitting the country more than ever before, with no real meaning and no resolve. It's also clear that these decisions are based on egos with no impact of the world and its consequences. The economy is in question. Trade, trust, and diplomacy are all at risk. It's kind of deep. Today on the show, I have, once again, welcome back to the show, attorneys, Mr. Paul Jefferson and David Benz. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You just heard what I wrote, and you guys are attorneys, so you know the law, you know the Constitution. Give me your viewpoint, Paul, on what I just said, how you think we as individuals, more importantly, how important is it for us to really embrace the right to vote, the right to express, and hopefully the right to change?
Well, I mean, I would say a couple things. First of all, I read a study once that every generation thinks their generation is the most broke politically that's ever occurred. So I don't think we're unique in that respect in terms of how we feel, although I do think that our foreign policy has provided some ways that other people can expand their sphere of influence at our detriment. But regardless of that, and in terms of voting, I just think voting is important for two reasons that you touched on in maybe a different way. The first one is obviously if you don't vote, you can't help choose the candidates that get elected.
Right.
But the other thing is it's the most direct and consequential way, particularly if you're not contributing financially or otherwise to campaigns, to be involved in a political process. It's something that's open to everybody, as long as they meet the minimum requirements of age and other things. But it shows you're invested. And people who say that their vote doesn't make a difference, that's absolutely true if you don't exercise it. But if you do, at least you're part of the process, and you can say that your voice was heard in it. So.
Okay, Dave, what do you think about that?
Well, just reacting to what Paul said. First, with respect to the vote, look, there's no mandatory conscription in this country. Nobody is required to serve in the military. Nobody was required to do really much anything. We're all born citizens.
Right.
I think as you get deeper into the Constitution, that's one of the things that's unique about this country, is that we're all born citizens. We're all born with the same rights. There's probably some elaboration that's necessary on that, but at least conventional wisdom today,
Right.
is that everyone is born with the same rights. If I were to ascribe a certain civic duty then to being part of the United States, being a citizen in the United States, then yes, I would say vote. I would say voting. I would say it's your civic duty to vote. You're not going to get kicked out if you don't vote. But I mean, come on. If all I have to do is vote to maintain my citizenship in this country, which I still firmly believe, there's no other country on earth I would rather live in than the United States. And I don't think that's asking too much. You made a point about foreign policy, and as I was listening to you open, Dre, and your comment about, for sort of the first time in our history,
Mm-hmm.
I heard an interview not too long ago. Actually, that's not true. It was long ago. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago, but the years meld together now. And they were interviewing a British citizen. Or British subject, I suppose. And it was, well, gosh, you know what it was? It was during the 2012 Olympics.
Okay.
It was 8 years ago. I can do the math. It was 8 years ago. And they were asking him about, his experience at the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. And in particular, and I think this was on NPR, the reporter was kind of obsessed and was really trying to draw a response from this interviewee. About the fact that the American fans were so obnoxious and they were cheering so loud and all that kind of stuff. And,
Right.
And he's like, no. And in the, with the classic stiff upper lip British accent and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not going to try to emulate or imitate. But he was saying something to the effect of, it doesn't bother us. It's the Americans. And while we may find it curious that Americans are so proud in themselves, and Americans think that they need to be better than everybody else.
Right.
They are, and they do.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's something that we've enjoyed for a long time. Certainly not since our history, since the beginning of our history, but call it the 1950s. I think we
Right.
have enjoyed a point where we were. We were one of the two superpowers, certainly,
Right.
and that culminated in the late '80s, early '90s when we became the superpower. But now I'm not sure that we're the only ones that hold that position any longer, and I think the rest of the world is starting to realize it. And I think that has a profound impact, regardless of who you vote for on November 3rd. I think that's just a facet of foreign policy for us now that we can't avoid. We're not the best in everything anymore, and I don't know that I don't know that A, that's possible to
Right.
be the best at everything, or B, that it's necessarily a bad thing that we're not the best at everything.
Do you think that the world looks at us like we should be? Do you think that we set the trend for other countries and our allies, and they're looking at us now like, what's going on over there?
Well, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
This goes back to the last time that Paul and I were guests on your show, and about setting those expectations.
Right.
And it's like, if you create beast mode, you
You got to live.
better
Okay.
perform.
You
in
better
beast
perform.
mode. So
now we now live. What's the Phil Collins land of confusion?
I didn't think we'd be talking about Phil Collins tonight, but or today. But that's amazing. Yeah, there's something in the air tonight, and we could studio it all along. No, I think that the hallmark of American policy, both economic and foreign, has been its consistency. And right now, it's more inconsistent than it's been. And I say that not as some sort of subjective or pejorative thing. It's just true. France is now running on their current prime minister or leader is running on a platform of, expanding their global influence. And they never thought that was necessary before, because the U.S. was kind of taking care of it on behalf of NATO. And now those things aren't lining up the way they used to. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, is for each individual to decide, but it's happening that the world is having more of a sphere of influence than we are in some respects. And whether that may make some sense. There's always been a tension in terms of focusing on ourselves first or focusing on the world as a whole, but that is shifting.
What is the platform that we should be? Let me rephrase this. What is the platform that America should be demonstrating right now to our allies, to the world, more importantly, to the people that live here? What platform are we actually running on? And from outside looking in, what do you think we should be running on? It definitely shouldn't be the parties in question. To my opinion, I think it should be more of the topics. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm not sure it matters to me as much what the topics are as to what they aren't. Right now, I think the topic is, it's for the Democrats, the Republicans are bad, and for the Republicans, the Democrats are bad. And I really wish either one of them would come out with a platform that was more focused on something other than each other. Again, it's like economic policy. Economic policy doesn't have to be perfect to be great. To be great, though, it does have to have some consistency to it. That's what borrowing and lending money relates to. And there's just a lot of inconsistency, I think, because both parties are kind of fighting against each other as opposed to finding some sort of platform or altruistic solution. And there are some outliers and some politicians who I know their heads are in the right place. I know them personally, but and I don't think that's.
So what did you say? We was working out in the gym, and you said something I thought was funny, but it made perfect sense.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah, you know what I'm getting ready to say. So.
No, I don't. That's why I'm saying oh dear, but go ahead.
This is what we deal with every day. So you said something about the Republicans make you think that this, that, and the other, and the Democrats make you believe this.
Well, I think, my cynical view of politics is that the Republicans have figured out that if they align with the more wealthy Americans, they'll get a lot of contributions and get reelected. And I think the Democrats have figured out if they align with more working class America, they'll get more votes and get reelected, and each serves their own base. And, that seems to be where it's going. But, obviously there's some outliers to both of those things. And you could argue whether or not those policies are right, wrong, or indifferent, and probably come up with credible arguments on both sides.
You said something just a minute ago. You emphasized when I said what platforms should we be running on, and you was like the things that aren't being addressed. So let me ask you guys, what things would you like to see being addressed that currently haven't been addressed? And then I'm going to tell you what I think needs to be addressed.
Oh, that list is long. I kind of look at that question a little differently. As a lawyer and somebody used to teach constitutional law and studied philosophy and government, I'm not sure everybody thinks about the fact that every law and regulation is really a limitation on someone's rights. Right. We get together and we form this governmental unit, and we agree that we're going to give up some of our rights as people because it's in everybody's best interest. But I'm not sure all of the statutes and rules are in everyone's best interest. And I'm not sure that, I know that some of them are to benefit very specific people and individuals. And maybe, that's not the right way to govern. And so the ways you would, I think, potentially deal with that is to vote in people who, might be for things like term limits, might be for things like, some more transparency in terms of fundraising and things like that. But, politicians are like everybody else. They're fundamentally self-preservationists. They want to get reelected, and a lot of the rules are designed to make that happen. So, yeah.
What do you think, Dave?
Well, I think what you're describing, and I hate using this phrase, but to level set for a second. I think what you're describing is somewhat unique to the United States. And I go back to the Constitution. I go back to before the Constitution, to the Declaration of Independence. and the notion, sort of the great American experiment. It was the Locke experience, the John Locke experiment of these rights exist in us. So to your point, yes, I absolutely agree that any law is a limitation on an individual right, but put it in the right framework, put it in the right context. That's something that's unique. It only has a 240-year history.
Right.
It's not something that has thousands of years behind it. And I get frustrated. I get frustrated when some people compare us to other countries and say, oh, well, we could be doing better here because, well, are you talking politics or are you talking particular topic? Because if you're talking about the particular topic, then yes, we can discuss that, and we can discuss how we might approach that differently.
Right.
But I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater here.
Right.
I think the United States is amazing in the respect that we are formed on the basis of as a human being, you possess certain rights by your Creator, and those rights are ceded then to a government in order to form a more perfect union.
Yeah, but you will have individuals based on what we're dealing with today. I mean, we got to pull the blinders off. Let's be
no
real.
question.
We got to pull the blinders off here. The Constitution was designed. The Declaration of Independence was designed. But let's be real, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. We need to. Let me rephrase it so this make a little bit of sense to the viewers. You can't, and we talked about it, so I'm going to be pretty blunt with it. You can't tell me that the Declaration and the Constitution really had me in mind.
Well, they had you in mind for 3/5, I think, but
yeah. Let's be real. You can't be my founding forefathers, and you own rights to slaves, and then sit there with a group of individuals and write, all men are created equal, and then within a couple years, we went through civil wars, we went through World War I, and we're still dealing with a civil war. I mean, we went through the first Civil War where people didn't know what they were fighting for. Then we went through another Civil War where we had to reinsert America, build America. Then we went through a third Civil War, which is racism, and then we're dealing with the fourth part of the Civil War right now, which is what we're dealing with now. So my view, and that's what it is. It's a view. It's my way of looking at things. That's why we're talking about this on this show, to let people know the importance of having their voices. In order to move forward with the future, we definitely have to understand the past. And I'm a firm believer in what you just said. I don't think politicians should, if the president only gets 4 years, or then he gets reelected for another 4 years, we don't need congressmen and senators to be on lobbying it for pass the torch on to my cousin, pass the torch on to here. We need to bring new leaders, young leaders. Young leaders need to respect and understand the old philosophy, and we kind of need to make America real like a corporation. You know, when you go see your car and your car gets old after 4 and 5 years, it's time to upgrade. And I think we don't do that when it comes to the Constitution. We don't do that when it comes to the Declaration of Independence. But they can be done because we did it during the Corona. We made people lock down. We put laws into effect. So what's the problem here?
Well, hold on a second, because again,
I threw a lot at you, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. And just to be fair, this is a little far off topic of the importance of voting and even politics today to some extent. But again, I go back to what I said about not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Do I think that we need a new constitution whole cloth? No, I don't. And I think that is one of the topics that's being discussed today, as to whether our form of government works.
Right.
And I go back to the concept of this being the great experiment, where the rights didn't come to you via some monarch. Okay. The rights are inherent in you, and you agree to give up some of those rights. Paul, the 3/5 thing really had more to do with taxation than anything else. It really did. It had to do with southern states wanting to have more representation without having to pay more tax, which really formed the basis of our declaring independence from Britain, right? I mean, that's why we declared. That's what we were all taught. And so for all the people out there that think the 1617 project is a bunch of bunk, no, I really don't think it is. I think there's some validity to it because, again, it's this concept of, well, why did we declare the independence from Britain? Representation without government. What did we turn around and do?
The same
representation without government.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think that there may be some latent inconsistencies, but at the same time, when you go back and you read, and Paul, you can probably speak a lot better to this than I can, but if you were to go back and you were to read what some of the framers of the Constitution said, some of the debates that went on, I'm thinking of Federalist Paper 51 and it going into the role of the federal government and whatnot. I think you had two groups of people. You had a group of people that thought that human beings could be property, and I think you had a group of people that thought that human beings could not be property.
Right.
All right. So it wasn't a decision, or it wasn't a discussion outright of slavery versus not slavery. Are you entitled to the same rights that I am? It's actually, and I think kind of scary, more fundamental than that, and that is, can another human being be property?
Right. That's what we talked about.
Right. And I really think that had that been addressed, and this is just my opinion, so take it for what it's worth, which is probably not very much, but had we had that conversation directly head on at that time, I don't think that we would be the United States of America today.
Okay.
Now, along with that then comes a lot of responsibility. So it's funny because I think if people hear me say that, if people hear me start talking out by saying, well, no, the Constitution is based on the notion that a human being cannot be property.
Right.
So if you really get into it, the Constitution sort of implicitly says slavery is wrong. Dre, you are entitled to the same vote and the same voice and the same rights that I am.
Right.
So people hear me say that and they think, oh, we know where this guy is going. Well, no, you don't. No, you don't. Because what we did was we gave me a tremendous head start. I've had an amazing head start.
What do you mean by when you say a tremendous head start? Because the girls are like, what are you talking about?
I'll use what he said. I was 1, you were 3/5.
Okay. Explain
okay.
That. Explain
I
that.
had the right to vote. You did not have the right to vote.
Right.
You were given the right to vote, but were you actually given the right to vote?
No.
No. That took a long time, and of course, it's not you, it's not me, but at least in looking at this, country, in terms of this great experiment,
right?
Because I keep going back to that notion of this was an experiment. This was unlike anything that the world had seen before, where the rights existed in the individuals and the rights ceded those by saying, go ahead and make a law that's going to limit some of these rights for the purpose of having a better society. And if we want that, if we still want that, which I really hope, and I with every fiber of my being, I hope that we still do want that, then it's going to take people like me recognizing that, no, it's not a level playing field. It never has been a level playing field, and we need to do something to make it a level playing field. And then in that manner, by recognizing that everybody has these same rights, then we can get to that more perfect union.
What do you think, Paul?
I think a lot of things, but as it relates to the right to vote, I think that we need to stop thinking in terms of, if we have the right president, we'll have the right government, or if we have the right Supreme Court, they'll overturn laws that give one side or the other a reset on particular things. We need to stop ceding that power to a group or an individual and take it for each voter's own. And that's exactly what voting is. But people look to elect the person who will do for them, and I think people need to do for themselves, and they need to show up. To me, it's a tragedy in this country that less than 50% of the eligible voters will decide our president if this year's statistics hold up to past years, and that's not how it should be. But let's also not forget, this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. African Americans haven't been able to vote in this country during most of its history. The South's economic engine of cotton and tobacco drove our economic stance, and we still benefit from that today as a country, and I'm not sure there's acknowledgement of that. And my hope is that what's going on with race now involves a new type of conversation, one that includes empathy and compassion, as well as trying to force different political agendas one way or the other. And that would be, to me, the conversation I'd like to see happen.
I wrote something else, and I'm going to get your viewpoints on this. The United States is no longer a cohesive unit. Okay? Well respected around the world. We used to be admired and envied, and now it seems like the other countries pity the United States. And definitely they're worried about the effects on them.
And I'm not sure those things are any different now than they have been at different times in our history. What I do think is different is, I do think we're nearing a tipping point as to how we're going to govern and whether we're going to, just fight against the other side, or whether one party or the other is going to stand up and come up with a platform that's designed to be more, I don't want to use the word altruistic, but more than just my stance is to be against them. We see this a lot of times in things like gerrymandering, things like redistricting, which the way that all happens is it could be a whole other subject. But this election's important. It's important for that reason as well. It's a census year, so every district's going to be redrawn, after this year's over, and the party in charge you can bank on it benefiting them.
You said it's important. What really makes it important in your eyes? Versus every 4 years seems to be important to people. But what do you think now that is really important for individuals to get out there and go to those ballots?
This has just been an amazing year in terms of everything, right? And I'm not sure that having some sort of reset because, of what illness, COVID-19, and how that all works hasn't had some really positive things. And one of the things I think that's been good is I feel like people are getting informed on different things because they have the time to do it. And I feel like people are on the verge of engaging in a different way. And that my hope is that's exactly what happens. So we'll see.
David, we talked about this, and to the viewers, this is how this topic even came up. Because like I said, when you're talking politics to individuals, you're almost like a bicycle on a tightrope. You don't know the reaction you're going to get. And naturally, we've talked about it with openness, and we don't agree with everything, but almost 98% we are agreeing on. I mentioned that I think the country should be run almost like a corporation, because let's think about it for a minute. The Romans, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, they all conquered, and they bought in their form of government, and they still took the spoils of war and still implemented some of their teachings to not totally annihilate their beliefs. What's your viewpoint on revitalizing, upgrading the software to Americans' policies as it deals with us?
I don't know that my opinion is really worth anything on that. But in responding to that, I think I'm going to go back to something that Paul said, and address the question of why is this year so important? Because I think I'm echoing what you said, but I think we are reaching a tipping point where we're having to say, is our form of government the right form of government for us now in this time period, for our role in a broader setting? Well, this is so intertwined, but going back to something that you said at the very beginning, or that we were exchanging in the very beginning about, look, the United States of 2020 is much different than the United States of 1950 or 1960.
Correct.
2 examples. COVID-19, okay? Certainly the way that this country was founded, and, if you, I refer again to the Federalist Papers, and if you read the Federalist Papers and about what the Constitution was supposed to be creating in terms of a republic and individual states, and the power of government generally being reserved to the states with very limited enumerated powers, apart from your favorite, the Dormant Commerce Clause.
I'm a big Third Amendment guy too. We don't want soldiers in our house, but yeah.
It's a much different world, and I don't think that works in the framework of COVID-19. I don't know. I could be wrong. You could go to Europe and you could say, well, we've done it in Europe. The other topic, though, is, and this gets a little bit even more poignant in terms of an example, is you can't deny climate change.
Global warming?
I didn't say global warming. I said climate change. I said
Okay.
climate change because I'm not going to get into the argument of, is it hot or is it cold or is it, and whether it's man-made. Me personally, I have a view on it. Okay, but whether you believe it's man-made or not, you can't deny that it's actually happening.
Right.
Because even the people that say, well, it's not man-made, it's just cyclical. Okay, so what? It's cyclical. We're just going to say, okay, do what you want to do. Mother Nature, I'm just sitting here. No, we've got to deal with it. We have to deal with it, and you can't deal with it in isolation.
Right.
Right? So again, I go back to the notion of, is it time that we revisit whether or not our chosen form of government and this experiment that we've tried, is it time to revamp it? And and again, I go back to the notion of not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because I think it's a pretty amazing experiment. But I do think that this year is a very important year, and I echo everything that Paul has said in terms of it's disappointing. Is that the right word? That less than 50% of those available to vote actually do vote.
Why do you think that is? That 50% haven't? Is because maybe they don't trust the system?
Well, I think I don't like your corporation analogy, to be honest.
Okay.
I think we kind of have.
You see how we agreed to disagree, but we're not arguing about it.
Yeah, well, that'll happen later. I'll take you out back and teach you what's what. But the problem with the corporation view is whoever has the majority of the votes wins, and the votes aren't equal.
Well, why not just put them in exile for 10 years, like the?
Well, but my point is,
did.
I think people don't vote because they feel like it is a corporation, that their vote doesn't matter, and I think people need to all understand that their vote does matter. And in recent years, we've had obviously we had Bush versus Gore and that whole issue, but we've seen some really close elections, and I hope that causes people to take note that their vote does actually count. I think the Electoral College, it's interesting. Currently, one party favors it and the other doesn't, and that seems to switch every 20 years or so, but depending on who's in power. But, it's an interesting way to select. But, regardless of what happens on the presidential side, what happens in your local elections, particularly as it relates to state legislatures and things like that, in a year where we redraw maps, those votes really do count. So hopefully people will exercise their rights.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree, and I'll even go so far as to say that I am not as bothered by the fact that it's only 50% of the or less than 50% that votes in the presidential election. It's, to me, what's concerning is that, if I gave you a ballot for here locally, Indiana, Marion County, Central Indiana, I bet you wouldn't recognize half those names.
Right.
I didn't know that Rokita was running for attorney general.
Yeah.
But the reason why I place the importance on the local elections, the way that the reason why I will draw an emphasis to the local elections is, number one, like you just said, that does determine things like redistricting and whatnot. But number two, I go back to the reason why this election is so important, and that is the electoral college, the gerrymandering itself, all that stuff is a reflection of the fact that, at least as we started out, it was a collection of the states ceding limited power to a federal government for things like the general defense. Okay? It wasn't the United States of America, it was the United States of America, the idea being that people could control themselves and govern themselves at a local level while only ceding certain powers to a federal government. And I think I think the federal government certainly has grown to the size now, and I'm not arguing one way or another. I'm just pointing out that it's grown to a certain size now where it's imperative that we address that. We can't just keep saying one thing and then doing a different thing. You're right, it does switch about every 20 years, so why don't we address it? Why don't we talk about it and see if the electoral college makes sense anymore? Does it make more sense for the vast majority of the population, which it lives in metropolitan centers? Does it make more sense for them to have a bigger say in who is the president? I don't know why I used air quotes there. President.
With the let me ask this. Let's do a scenario. Jason. I wish we had some presidential music in the background going.
If this is going to involve a comet hitting the Earth,
no, nothing like that.
All
right. But I'm running for president. I'm gonna start with you first. Based on 2020, I'm running for president right now, and you know you have the platform right now. What's the number? Name me 3 things that you want to discuss with me that are important to you moving forward in 2020.
Race issues, foreign relations issues, and economic stability.
Let's start with the first topic. Why do you say that?
I think that the question of race it's not only necessary to address it. I think now is the perfect time for a new conversation about it. We're in the middle of, one of those cycles where, in at least my own personal view, but I think it's fair to say a group of people feel like they've not been heard before, and they're speaking out in ways that a lot of people don't like, violent protests or protests generally.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish, in response to that, the people in charge would be more along the lines of, you have something to say, so let me understand what it is, rather than let's figure out how to quash this and make it go away. Because, this tug of war that we've been playing for centuries in this country isn't getting us anywhere.
Right.
What would get us somewhere is taking the opportunity to, and this probably goes back to my kind of personal philosophy of life, but when painful moments happen, that's the opportunity to connect. That's when things can be most real and most of the change can occur. That I think that exists culturally as well, and I think there are a lot of people hurting and in pain, and a lot of people who are afraid for different reasons. And I mean, fear exists on both, the black side and white side of this question, and the time is right to reconcile that. And if we ever could, imagine what this country could be if we could all kind of move forward together. So that's why I would put that first.
Paul, I'm running for president. Give me 3 of your topics that you want to address with me.
I think I'd pick the same topics that he picked.
So he did the race. Give me go to the second one.
Foreign policy.
Was it foreign policy or was it
foreign policy, foreign relations? I just think our role in the world is ripe for thoughtful consideration. So,
what was the third one?
Economic issues.
Take the economic issues.
I'll take all 3. I'll take all three because in my mind, as you were talking, Paul, I was thinking, this goes back to our the last time that Paul and I chatted with you, and I apologize if it caused embarrassment, but my identifying Paul as somebody that I immediately saw being a great leader.
Right.
And it's because Paul can be
compassion. Compassionate?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I use the phrase because Bob still makes fun of me for it. I think I use the phrase soft around those sharp edges. No
Right.
sharp edges. Sort of thoughtful compassion, thoughtful empathy, things like that. The thing that people complain about me is I've been very successful not taking a side.
Right.
Okay, I haven't. So I hear Paul, and whether it's race, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's economic stabilization, things like quashing the protests and just shut up, versus stoking the protests.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using other people's words. Okay, kowtowing to the Chinese versus thumbing our noses at them. All right, everything is so incredibly polarized, and I think that's one of the problems that we've got right now. Is I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I really don't. I'm not. But it just seems to me like somebody is profiting, and I will use air quotes there, profiting. It's to someone's advantage, and I'm not smart enough to figure out who, but it's to someone's advantage for us to be so incredibly polarized on a lot of these very, very important issues that using political game theory,
Right.
We would be a lot better off if we all work together. It's not a zero-sum game. We have the opportunity here, if we do come together on race relations, if we do come together on what our foreign policy is, or how to create a more level playing field economically for people in this country. We all stand to gain if our focus is raising the water for everybody, not for one particular person, and that's going to take some give and take from where we're at right now. And Paul, it's you said your characterization of Republicans as sort of catering to the rich because that's where they get their money, and Democrats catering to the working person. Well, that's as simple as saying, well, people who like Coke like Chevy, and people who like Pepsi like Ford. That's not helpful. That's not helpful because it's not even accurate. It's not even accurate. I mean, there's the ultra high net wealth base for the Democrats far exceeds what Republicans have now today. I mean, Republicans can point to some very key high net worth individuals, but most of when you go down the list of the equivalent of the Forbes 100 for the U.S., most of those donate more towards Democratic campaigns, and it also doesn't explain why there's such a huge base for our current president of people that you would suspect that would see the obvious of, no, somebody's fighting for you, and why don't you follow the people that are fighting for you? And I forgot where I was going with that thought, but and I think that with all three of those topics, unless we stop the polarization and we realize that we need to work together, I think we do get to that tipping point where the baby is going to go out with the bathwater.
We're gonna get ready to wrap up, and I'm gonna try to address those three topics as the guy that's running for the presidency.
Is he announcing something right now?
I don't
Yeah.
know. I think it's a little too late. You need signatures, and there's a process here, but whatever.
The first thing you talked about was race, and I'm a firm believer that in order to understand any race, we also need to understand that we're all a part of the human race, and that does need to be addressed. If I was the president, that would have to be the number one topic. And I think in order to move forward with that topic about race, we always go back to the beginning. And once we go back to the beginning, we can move forward. I remember somebody called me and said, what can I do based on they was of a different race? And I said, what can I do? And I said, really, just listen. I don't expect you to completely understand, but it's kind of like what you said and what you said. Give me the ability to vent for a moment, and show some type of compassion in my voice. But more importantly, after I've done that, just sit down and figure out how we can put it forward. You tell me what you don't like about me. You tell me what you do like about me, and let's discuss these topics and come up with a solution.
It's going to be a long show on both of those things, so I'm just telling you.
The second thing that you talked about was economics. We talked about something in the gym, and I didn't understand the two chickens in a pot. As history taught me, my ancestors were supposed to get two mules and some land. That didn't happen. You mentioned a quote about the two chickens in the pot. If we can just make it an even playing field, I don't want riches. I want to be able to provide for my family. I want an education for my family. I want them to have a nice home. I want them to be able to prosper moving forward. If the laws could be designed to allow that to happen for people, we might have a better playing field. And that's going to take some time. You know, it's sad when politicians and government can't really go back and look at laws that don't work, constitutional laws that don't work, and fix it. You know, even if you start with one law, you've done something. If you revitalize one law. And I think that happens when, like I said, old meets new, and we both sit down and we figure what we need to do to move forward. The third thing you talked about is global, you know, our foreign affairs. It saddens me when I talk to people from other countries, and like I said when my opening statement, the United States was once and still looked upon as a powerful nation. Leaders of men taking countries that are under duress and making them accountable, but also making them stronger. And they're now looking at us like, what in the hell is going on here? You know, and we fail to realize our actions are affecting them. As your guy that's running for president, I would sit down with these leaders and say, look, I'm sorry about our actions. We're not perfect. And I think what you said, we put on that Superman cape, USA, and there is a bit of arrogance, a bit of irony with that. But humility and humbling down and say, you know what, I'm human. We made mistakes from the moment that we came across Britain or to the New World. And yeah, we were an experiment. And the experiment had its ups and its downs. We need to look at the ups and the downs. We need to put them on a piece of paper. We need to sit down with both young and old and figure out how we can do it one step at a time.
Well, here I will say that we have an obligation. Okay, here's our civic duty. Our civic duty is that as this experiment has gone along, each generation has addressed that experiment and dealt with that experiment without just pouring gas on it and setting it aflame.
Right.
All right? And so I do think that we have a civic duty to address these things. Look, I don't deny that what you're talking about right now is a concern, but Paul and I were talking about this yesterday. I met a young lady from Nigeria yesterday, or not yesterday, last week. Mm-hmm. I met a lady from Nigeria last week who was just naturalized the week before. She still views America as that shining city on the hill. Is that the right? She still sees it as that shining city on the hill. I would be far more concerned if people, not other governments, not other sovereigns, if people stopped seeing the U.S. as that shining light on the hill. But I think people still do see us as that shining light on the hill. So our civic obligation, us, the people sitting at this table, the people in this city, the people in this state, people now today, our civic obligation is to make sure that we keep this experiment going and that we don't just end it.
What you got to say in closing, Paul, on that?
Well, I just want to go back and David, my cynical view of things is, of course, inaccurate, and that's that's the point. Is that the last thing I want to say is just that we, as both a culture and as a political force, need to change, I think, how we talk, and instead of being, let's figure out a way procedurally or voting wise to force our view onto the other side or onto the world or onto the process that we want to see. Why don't we try to meet in the middle? And one of my favorite political philosophers is a guy named Hegel, and Hegel didn't believe that history ever repeated itself. He believed it was linear, and he believed that there was an event and then its opposite, and then the two would come together and form something different. Then it would happen over and over and over again. So after World War II, you have a time of peace, for example. He would call that process synthesis, and I think it's time to synthesize some of our views and to sit down and try to figure out where we are, and instead of just pushing against one another, come together and try to solve some of these problems. Our form of government is amazing at addressing issues. We aren't, in my view, as good as being proactive in terms of how we do things. But now we can. Okay, technology has taught us this. When our country was formed, we couldn't travel across it in 5 hours like we can now. So let's take advantage of those things and make it what we want it to be.
With that said, I'm gonna close out. I said earlier that the United States is no longer considered a cohesive unit. I can retract that today and say thanks for you guys being on the show, because 3 individuals can sit here and talk about politics. We may not agree on everything, but we're at least at 98%. We are a cohesive unit, because not the fact that we're part of the United States, but we're part of a bigger picture here. We're part of the human race, and human race is everyone. We need to get out. We need to let our voices be heard. Those ballots are there for a reason. Our ancestors fought for it, whether they was the first at the ballot or whether they're the second at the ballot. We now have the opportunity to do that. The percentages need to go up. This is 2020. We have dealt with enough. There is time for change, and the only way change will take place is if we do our part. Stop crying and get to those polls. With that said, thank you, David. Thanks, Paul, for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Tune in again for another episode of the Andre the Beast Show.
Thanks.